things you said, but comparing the Army to New York City transit workers or railroad workers is a little bit like apples and oranges. Not that I want to, go down that path with you. I want to comment certainly on some of the things that have been said here. First of all, like a reality check. You talk about the potential institutional racism with the doling out of overtime. You're not talking about New York City Transit, though. You're talking about the railroads, I assume.
Yes, sir.
But with that said, you know what institutional racism is? This is institutional racism. Having a political insensitivity to send armed police into our workplaces. And I don't understand how everybody here, every part of this management group, is not utterly embarrassed at the fact that you're acknowledging that your management is so dysfunctional and so messed up that you gotta send the cops in. You should all be so totally embarrassed. I think the writing public recognizes that. I think the media recognizes that, and it's true. So if you're gonna talk about institutional racism, I think you need to look in the mirror. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I appreciate the report by Larry Schwartz, the cherry-picked information that he put forth to the board. I appreciate that, but really what he did, it could be encapsulated by saying that he just described a decade of gross, total mismanagement by the MTA and a decade of indifference, mismanagement, incompetence by the MTA board, of which many people here are part of. And I just heard something very enlightening, that there's an overtime report every single month that comes to not only the presidents of the individual agencies and their management teams, but to the finance committee. So the very thing that Larry Schwartz is pointing out about overtime abuse, he's looking at every single month.
Every month.
So where you been for 4 years?
That's right.
What have you been doing?
Indeed.
Except going on the news yesterday and making extremely irresponsible allegations about fraud and about crime and criminality without absolutely no evidence to back that up whatsoever. You're talking about stuff that happened 10 years ago. That's how you started this conversation. You were on the news yesterday talking about fraud and pension abuse. Give everybody in this room, including the media, an example of fraud or pension abuse that you're aware of. And I guarantee you it's zilch, because this is all high theater, it's all nonsense, it's all not much ado about nothing. And by the way, every one of us here that's from the union movement, that represents members, we're all for an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. But there's a great irony, and I'll say it again, a great irony at play here. On the subway side of the house, on the New York City Transit side of the house, the system fell into a complete and total state of disrepair. That 2 years ago. That's what happened because you were understaffed and you didn't have headcount. So you adopted a broad program to restore reliability into the New York City subway system. And by the way, the TWU played a large role in what that looked like. Right? The company, not the TWU, determined that 2,000 heads had to be hired to get the system back into a state of reliability. You hired about 700 or 800 transit workers. You were supposed to hire 2,000. When you want to increase service delivery and you want to increase the state of good repair and the track, and you need 2,000 bodies and you don't hire them, you know what you do? You pay overtime. You pay overtime. That's how you get it into shape. So is it a shock to anybody in the room that overtime is being paid out at a higher percentage in 2018 during the subway action plan than it was previously? I'm surprised it didn't spike 50%. It's amazing, and it's a sheer and utter disregard for your own workforce on so many levels. I would be shocked if this doesn't organically resonate across the subway tracks, the bus system, the railroad tracks, and a dip in productivity to add to all the problems of incompetence and mismanagement that you're already suffering. It's buyer's remorse on your part. If you don't want to pay out the overtime, hire enough staff to maintain the system in a state of good repair. If you want to pay overtime rather than hiring another 1,300 transit workers and absorbing the pension costs and the health benefit costs, if your management scheme to avoid that is to pay out overtime to avoid those broader costs, then don't have buyer's remorse and don't run to the media crying about fraud, non-existent fraud, non-provable fraud, totally inaccurate allegations that only succeed in pumping air into a balloon that's already about to pop. That's how irresponsible it is. This is your choice. These are all management choices. If you don't want us to work overtime, don't assign us overtime. It's a pretty simple equation. Norman said it. If you don't want us to work overtime, don't assign it, and see how quick the system falls into a state of disrepair. So I think it's time for you to tell the truth, Pat, for Larry Schwartz to tell the truth. The media's in the room. Everybody is in the room. You're assigning this overtime. Is there an allegation that somehow union represented workers at the MTA have made their own overtime, conjured up their own overtime, given themselves overtime assignments. It all comes from bosses. This is not us. We receive overtime as assigned by the company. If you don't want to give us overtime, don't give it to us. But when you give us the overtime, stop the hyperbole, stop the high theater, stop the nonsense, and come to the bargaining table and bargain with us. If anybody thinks for a moment that when Larry Schwartz goes on CBS News and talks about gross fraud and abuse, that we're quaking in our boots, we're not quaking in our boots. We've rode this storm out before. This is a management problem. Fix your management problem. And by the way, a biometric system, that's an interesting concept. How is that going to stop the overtime? How is a biometric system going to stop the overtime? You're going to spend $5,000 or $6,000 a pop on a biometric system. And by the way, do you realize how many reporting locations there are in the New York City subway system? You probably don't, but it's in the neighborhood of 1,500. So you're going to buy 1,500 biometric devices, maintain those biometric devices, and then I'm feeling very prophetic right now. We're going to get overtime to maintain the biometric devices in a state of good repair, and then you're going to come back to this board and you're going to say there's something fraudulent going on with the maintenance of the biometric devices. Because we've seen this movie before. We've seen this movie cyclically, repeatedly, and you know what? I said cyclically, but it's actually sickening. That's what it is. You need to look inward. You need to get your own management team together. You need to somehow infuse some competence into this MTA, and you need to stop blaming your workers. And for anybody who's watching this, anybody's watching me say this, I'll tell you this. Any transit worker, any railroad worker that does a lick more than they have to do for you after you send armed cops into our workplaces is crazy. You burn bridges with them for the rest of the time you're going to be here. Armed cops. You turned our workplaces into a modern day chain gang into Rikers Island. And eventually you're going to pay the price for it in terms of worker morale. So I hope you're happy with what you did. And Larry, I hope you're happy with what you did, ranting and raving about fraud and abuse on CBS News. It was outrageously irresponsible. And you know what? I think I'm going to talk to some of these media folks out here. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start talking about specific examples of management incompetence, management abuse. You know where they should have sent the cops? They should have sent them to 2 Broadway, because this place is rife with fraud and corruption. They shouldn't have sent them into our workplaces. So congratulations, Pat. Way to get started as the MTA chair. Send the cops into our workplaces for a fictitious, big freaking nothing burger. That's what that amounts to. Congratulations.